I've come back to the onion bed and root bed today to plant some more onions. These here, I'm just recapping, they're my overwintering onions or Japanese onions, doing really well. They'll provide me with an early crop. There's my chard and sorrel, and here's some mash that is going to seed now, and I'm going to remove that today before it sets seed everywhere and put some main crop onions in its place. Um, Here I've actually sown a couple of rows of beetroot, but the moles have been playing havoc with the soil there. Just having a look at my onion sets ready to plant. Onion sets are actually very sort of juvenile onions that have been grown to a certain point and then stopped. They're often heat treated, just using water at 40 degrees to kill various fungi that can attack your onion crop. Um, and I always start them off in little modules to get a good root system going, because otherwise you find that the black birds and moles and things pick them out of the ground very easily. And here's just an example of the nice little root system all ready to plant, and that will help them to get established in the soil very quickly to prevent disturbance from birds and cats in our house as well. Um, so I've got here two sets of onions to plant today. I'm just looking at the soil here. I've started clearing the mash, the lamb's lettuce, and I've found underneath it lots of slugs. Slugs can be a real problem, not so much for onions, but in the vegetable patch in general. It's one of the most difficult things to control in an organic way. Luckily, I've got chickens, and I shall be picking these up and feeding them to the chickens, but it's often difficult to find a way of preventing slugs from getting to your crops. We'll talk about them a little bit more later, but here is my string line laid out now. I've prepared all the soil, as you can see, and I've laid out my onions. If you just have a quick look at the trowel there, the blade of a trowel is traditionally it's about 6 inches long or 15 centimeters, and the handle is also about the same. So half the trowel is 6 inches, the whole trowel is a foot, and this is a really useful little guide for spacing your vegetables. Onions want to be about 6 inches or 15 centimeters, so the blade of the trowel apart in the row. I've laid them out all ready to go, as you can see. Look at all those lovely root systems, and I'm just planting them by making a small planting hole and packing them tightly into the ground with just the neck showing. Hopefully you can see that there. Just picking one or two little last bits of lamb's lettuce or mash out of the soil. I found actually the roots were really quite matted underneath that lamb's lettuce, and it was a bit difficult to prepare the soil perfectly. However, I need to get my onions out into that piece of ground, and I've just been breaking it up as I go along, really. So there I am bedding my onions in, and I'll continue along the row. Because these have got young root systems, I don't want them to dry out, so I am going to water this row. I'm going to water it quite deeply, just the once. If it doesn't rain in the next week or two, I probably will water them again, but generally we have a very strict water conservation policy here because we have no mains water, so we have to make our well water, see us all the way through the summer for household needs and collected water for garden needs, and we have to focus on the plants on the nursery. So yeah, I'm watering them in quite thoroughly. You can see I'm directing the water straight at the roots, and that should see them for a good few days. So other sort of plants that you would include in the alliums or onion bed would be shallots, leeks, garlic, and shallots and garlic you plant in almost exactly the same way. I always start them off in small modular trays first of all. Leeks are slightly different, and we'll have a look at them a bit later on because it's a little bit early to plant the leeks out yet. Um, I'll be planting my root crops amongst my onions. If you remember, they make very good companion plants. Um, but I've got space here for another row of onions in between the one I've just planted and my row of sorrel. The distance between the rows of onions is generally as wide as you can pass your hoe. Um, Here I've planted the carrots in between them, and I'm just looking at the shallots that are growing nicely now. Shallots are kind of like what we call bunching onions. They make a group. One little shallot bulb or set will give you a group of small onions, which are actually what shallots are. You see there that there were several plants coming up from that one spot, whereas this is a nice red onion developing quite nicely. They'll be ready for harvesting probably in early June. These are the overwintering onions, the earlies. They don't store as well as the main crop onions, but they give you a sort of intermediate crop that will help to see you from through the end of the stored crop from last year and the beginning of the main crop from this year. Main crop onions, we wait until all the foliage has died down, and it's usually around about middle of August here. And we lift them on a nice dry day, and then we leave them out to dry for a couple of weeks. Here I'm just showing you that my shard is starting to bolt, and this is why I've unfortunately got to remove it. It's starting to shoot up a growing point from the center of the plant, and it'll be running to seed, and all it'll want to do now, no matter how much I cut it back, all it will do is continue to try and flower and seed. Chard are what we call biennial plants. They grow a rosette of leaves in the first year, and this is what we harvest as a green spinach-like vegetable. But in the second year, they're triggered into flowering, and then they'll set seed and die. Actually, onions and carrots are all similar. This borecole here is also running to seed. I've used this in a decorative container, but it's also given us a few um, greens over the winter period, but it's going to seed now, and because these are open pollinated varieties, we can actually save the seed and grow them another year. Just cutting into a picture of my onions drying from last year, and then I plat them into plats and hang them up, and they last all winter.